The arena was shaking, not metaphorically, not the poetic shaking that journalists used in headlines the next day. This was real. The steel framework of the roof groaned under the weight of the roar. The concrete beneath thousands of stomping feet rattled like a living heartbeat, and every breath of 18,000 screaming fans condensed into a storm that threatened to blow the roof off the place. The name they were chanting was one the whole world knew. Michael, Michael, Michael. The chant wasn't just sound, it was pressure. It pressed into chests, rattled bones, and swallowed everything in its path. Signs waved high in the stands, glittering under the lights. Flashbulbs exploded like lightning, painting brief snapshots of tear-streaked faces, trembling hands, and mouths open wide in hysterical devotion. Backstage, just beyond a black curtain that quivered with every chant, Michael Jackson stood still. He was 38 years old, but in this moment he looked both timeless and human. His black sequin jacket shimmered even in the dim backstage glow. His white V-neck shirt, crisp against his dark skin, clung lightly with the heat of anticipation. One hand tugged absently at the cuff of his jacket. The other flexed, the famous rhinestone glove catching shards of stray light with every motion. Michael's breathing was shallow but controlled. Each inhale measured, each exhale precise. Anyone else might have been trembling with nerves, but for him, this was ritual. He had faced crowds twice this size, had commanded stadiums that looked more like cities. And yet, tonight felt different. There was a charge in the air, something electric, something that prickled at the skin like static before a storm. 30 seconds, a stagehand whispered, headset pressed tight against his ear. He leaned in, careful not to touch Michael, but close enough for his voice to cut through the roar. Michael nodded once. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was authority enough. The stage manager's voice crackled over the earpiece. Lights down. Cue pyro in 3, 2. The arena plunged into darkness. The effect was instantaneous. The audience erupted with a sound so violent it bordered on hysteria. In that split second of blackness, people clung to each other, screamed into the void, stamped their feet so hard the risers shook. The silence of instruments and lights turned every heartbeat into a drum. Then, boom, a wall of fire erupted across the edge of the stage, a line of orange and gold sparks spewing upward. Smoke curled and billowed, catching the blinding beams of spotlights that swept across the audience like searchlights. And then the silhouette appeared. Tall, lean, unmistakable. Hat tilted forward, one arm raised at a sharp angle, his body frozen in the iconic outline the world had memorized. The crowd screamed doubled, tripled. It wasn't sound anymore. It was hysteria incarnate. Some fans collapsed against a barricade, overcome. Others buried their faces in their hands, sobbing before the show had even begun. Michael took one step forward. The black boots hit the stage with precision, each step a detonation of hysteria. He didn't rush. He never rushed. He let the anticipation burn like a fuse. The spotlight followed, catching the shimmer of sequins, the pale shine of his shirt, the flash of the rhinestone glove. The band struck the first chord, a thunderclap of bass and drums that rippled through the stadium. Michael raised his head slightly, eyes scanning the ocean of humanity screaming his name. His lips parted, the faintest smile curving, not arrogance, not amusement, but recognition. These were his people. The dancers froze in position behind him, ready to explode into motion at a signal. The lights strobed, the bass line throbbed, and the entire building pulsed with energy. Michael's body coiled. Then, in a single lightning-fast motion, he snapped his head to the side. The crowd erupted as though the earth itself had cracked open. He hadn't sung a note. He hadn't even spoken. But already he owned them. Michael raised a microphone. The audience leaned forward, breathless, waiting for the first sound of his voice. And then something strange happened. In the third row, just left of center, a small figure shifted. At first it was unnoticeable, just another body in a sea of thousands. But Michael's eyes, sharper than most gave him credit for, locked onto it. A boy, no older than 7. Too small for the oversized T-shirt draped over him. A baseball cap tugged low to hide a scalp bare from chemotherapy. His thin arms clutched at the woman beside him. His mother. Michael realized in an instant, but his eyes weren't hysterical like the others. They weren't wide with screaming fandom. They were soft, fragile, shining with something Michael recognized instantly. Hope. For a fleeting moment, the roar of the crowd dulled in Michael's ears. The thunderous drums, the screaming chants, the blinding lights, all of it blurred into the background. He saw only the boy. Michael's hand hesitated on the microphone. His chest rose sharply, the spotlight catching the tremble in his breath. For the first time in the night, the king of pop faltered. The crowd didn't notice. They were too busy screaming, too busy waiting for the explosion of music they knew was coming. But the boy noticed. His lips curved into the faintest smile, weak but determined. He raised one trembling hand into the air, as though offering it to Michael. Michael froze. It was only for a second. But in a career built on control, precision, and perfection, a second of stillness was monumental. The music boomed on. The dancers waited. The lights flared. And Michael Jackson stood at center stage, heart hammering, staring at a frail 7-year-old boy who, without saying a word, had already changed the course of the night. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The band thundered on. Drums cracked like thunderclaps. The bass line punched through the floor. Guitars howled in perfect sync. The dancers waited for Michael's cue, frozen in their opening poses, expecting the flawless timing they had drilled for weeks. But Michael still hadn't moved. He was staring into the crowd. In the third row, that tiny figure shifted again. The boy. His little chest rose and fell with effort, and every few seconds his head lolled weakly against his mother's shoulder. But his eyes stayed locked on Michael. Michael's breath caught. He had sung to millions before. Stadiums, arenas, festivals so massive the crowds blurred into faceless waves. But this boy cut through it all, piercing him in a way no spotlight ever could. And then it happened. A voice, a woman's voice, rose above the roar. "Michael, please." It wasn't the usual shriek of a fan desperate for attention. It was ragged, breaking, filled with a pain so raw it sliced the music like a blade. Michael's head turned slightly, searching. The band hesitated. A guitarist faltered on his riff. One of the backup singers glanced nervously toward the wings. Something was off. The tension was palpable now, crawling over the stage like static. The woman shouted again, louder this time. "Michael, my son is dying. He loves you so much." The words slammed into Michael's chest like a physical blow. His gloved hand gripped the microphone tighter, trembling. 18,000 fans gasped almost in unison. The music wavered. The dancers, confused, slowly lowered their arms. The arena, which only seconds ago had been a roaring storm, began to quiet. The sound drained away, replaced by murmurs, shifting bodies, confusion spreading like ripples through water. Michael squinted against the blinding floodlights, trying to locate the source. Then he saw her. The mother was standing now, tears streaming down her face, holding the boy higher in her arms so Michael could see him. The child looked impossibly fragile, his head resting limply against her shoulder, his oversized T-shirt sliding off one thin shoulder. The baseball cap slipped slightly, revealing the pale, bald scalp beneath. Michael's throat tightened. His voice, when it finally came, was soft, uncertain. Nothing like the commanding presence the crowd was used to. What did you say?" The microphone carried the words across the arena, echoing against the concrete walls, magnified into every corner of the building. The audience, now deadly silent, leaned forward, straining to hear. The mother's voice cracked as she shouted again, her desperation filling every syllable. "This is my son, Jacob. He's 7 years old. He's dying. The doctors say he has maybe hours left. All he wanted was to see you." Gasps rippled through the arena. A woman in the balcony pressed both hands to her mouth. A grown man near the stage wiped at his eyes. Teenagers who had been screaming seconds ago now clutched each other, stunned into silence. Michael stood frozen, staring at the child. His heart pounded so loudly he could hear in his ears, louder than the drums, louder than the crowd. His lips parted, but no words came out. Jacob lifted his head slightly. His voice was faint, barely audible, but the microphone on stage caught it. "I love you, Michael." The words, soft as they were, ricocheted to the arena like thunder. Michael staggered one step back. His eyes glistened, shimmering under the harsh stage lights. He pressed his free hand against his chest, as though steadying himself against the weight of what he had just heard. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The band was silent now. The dancers stood still, forgotten. The arena held its breath. Every soul inside united in stunned, aching anticipation. Michael bent his head, whispering something no one could hear. Then he lifted the microphone, his voice trembling but resolute. "Stop the show." The word sent shockwaves through the arena. In his entire career, Michael had never once stopped a show like this. Fans exchanged stunned looks, unsure they had heard correctly. But the band knew. They set down their instruments, the last echoes of sound dying into silence. Michael turned to his crew at the side of the stage, his voice firmer now. "Bring them to me. Now." Security hesitated. One of the managers shook his head, mouthing, "We can't." But Michael's eyes blazed, his voice cutting like steel. "Now." Within seconds, ushers and security guards moved through the crowd, parting the sea of bodies as they reached the mother and child. The audience watched in utter silence as the small family was escorted down the aisle toward the stage. Michael stood at the edge, waiting. His breath shook as he extended a gloved hand downward. The mother, trembling, lifted Jacob into his arms. The arena erupted in a sound unlike anything before, not hysteria, not screaming. It was applause, deep and reverent, like 18,000 people recognizing they were witnessing something sacred. Michael held Jacob carefully, his frail body weightless against his chest. The boy's head rested on his shoulder, his tiny fingers brushing against the sequined fabric of Michael's jacket. Michael's voice cracked as he spoke into the microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jacob. He is 7 years old, and he is braver than anyone I have ever met." Tears streamed down faces across the arena. Parents hugged their children tighter. Strangers clasped hands. Even the crew members, hardened by years of spectacle, felt their eyes sting. Michael looked down at Jacob, his own tears slipping free now. He whispered softly, though the microphone carried every word. "You wanted to see me, little man? Well, tonight I want to see you." The boy smiled weakly, his small voice barely audible. I wanted to hear you sing." Michael's jaw clenched. He blinked hard, holding back sobs, then nodded. "You will." The arena roared in approval, but it wasn't the usual frenzy. It was something gentler, something reverent. 18,000 people knew they had just become part of a moment far greater than music. As Michael carried Jacob gently toward the side of the stage, preparing to take him backstage, the spotlight followed. The entire arena, every eye, every breath, was on them. In that moment, the king of pop wasn't a performer. He wasn't an icon. He wasn't the star of the show. He was simply a man holding a dying child, and 18,000 people were witnessing his heartbreak open in real time. The roar of the arena faded the moment Michael stepped behind the curtain. Out front, 18,000 fans sat in stunned silence, whispering to each other, trying to process what had just happened. The band members stood frozen at their instruments, waiting for orders. The dancers paced nervously, whispering, "Is he really stopping the show?" Crew members with headsets barked into radios, trying to coordinate. But Michael wasn't listening to any of it. He was carrying Jacob. The boy was feather-light in his arms, so light it made Michael's stomach twist. His small head rested against Michael's shoulder, his breath shallow but steady, his tiny fingers occasionally twitching against the sequins of Michael's jacket, as if clinging to the moment itself. Michael moved quickly, ignoring the chaos around him. "Clear my room," he ordered quietly to his manager. "Now." Security opened the way, guiding Jacob's mother and father close behind. Margaret, Jacob's mother, was weeping openly, covering her mouth with one hand, the other reaching toward her son. Tom, the father, walked stiffly, as if the enormity of the moment had locked his body into stone. Inside the dressing room, The lights were softer. The walls muffled the thunder outside. Michael gently lowered Jacob onto the couch, kneeling beside him so their faces were level. The boy's eyes fluttered open, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Hi," he whispered. Michael's throat tightened. He reached out, covering the boy's small hand with his gloved one. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly, his voice breaking into a register his audience never heard. "What's your name?" "Jacob." Michael smiled through the tears stinging his eyes. "Jacob," he repeated, letting the name linger. "That's a strong name. Your mama tells me you like my music." Jacob nodded weakly, his voice barely more than air. "Every night, I listen to You Are Not Alone." The words cut Michael to the core. He had written that song in pain, but hearing it through the mouth of this fragile child gave it a weight he had never imagined. His hand trembled as he brushed the boy's cap gently. Jacob's eyes glistened. "It helps me not be scared." The mother choked back a sob. Tom, the father, turned away, pressing his hand to his mouth. Michael swallowed hard, his vision blurring. He lowered his head, whispering so softly it was almost inaudible. "You're braver than I'll ever be." For a long moment, the room was silent except for Jacob's shallow breaths. The chaos of the arena seemed a universe away. Then Michael did something that stunned even his crew. He sat on the edge of the couch, motioned for Margaret and Tom to come closer, and whispered, "Would you let me sing for him?" Margaret nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "It's all he's ever wanted." Michael looked at Jacob, smiling gently. "You want me to sing for you, little man?" Jacob's eyes widened, and despite the exhaustion pulling at his body, he nodded. Michael took a deep breath. He had performed in front of royalty, in front of millions on television, in arenas that seemed endless. But this was different. This was sacred. He leaned in close, so his voice wouldn't have to strain, and began softly. "You are not alone. I am here with you." His voice cracked on the first line, raw with emotion, but he pressed on. He sang not to an arena, not to fans, not to the world, but to one boy. Each word was a promise, each note a prayer. Jacob's lips moved. Faint, almost inaudible, but he was singing along. Michael's eyes flooded. He had sung duets with the greatest artists in the world, but this fragile, trembling harmony was the most powerful of his life. Margaret clutched her husband's hand, tears streaming down both their faces. A makeup artist standing quietly in the corner covered her mouth, sobbing silently. Even the hulking security guard at the door wiped his eyes when he thought no one was looking. When the song ended, Michael bent down, pressing his forehead gently against Jacob's. "You are so loved, Jacob," he whispered. "Don't you ever forget that. Not tonight. Not ever." Jacob smiled faintly. It was small, but it was real, the kind of smile his parents hadn't seen in weeks. Michael kissed the boy's forehead, then turned to the parents. "Would you let me do something?" Margaret blinked through tears. "Anything." Michael stood, his voice steady now. "I want him with me on stage. Just for a moment. Let the world see him." Tom's mouth fell open. "On stage?" "In front of everyone." Michael nodded firmly. He deserves to be seen. He deserves to be celebrated. Margaret looked down at Jacob, brushing her hand across his pale cheek. "Would you like that, baby?" Jacob's voice was faint, but the answer was clear. "Yes." Michael straightened, determination flashing through his eyes. He turned to his manager. "Tell the band we're starting again. But this time, we're starting different." The crew scrambled into action, relaying orders through headsets. The arena outside was still buzzing, 18,000 people murmuring, confused, waiting. Nobody knew what was happening behind the curtain. Michael bent down once more, whispering into Jacob's ear, "You ready to make history with me?" Jacob's small hand squeezed his glove, and with that Michael Jackson, the biggest star on earth, prepared to walk back out on stage, not alone, not as an icon, but carrying a 7-year-old boy who had already changed everything. The arena was restless. It had been nearly 15 minutes since Michael had walked off stage, carrying the boy in his arms. 18,000 fans murmured, their whispers echoing like waves across the stands. Some speculated. Others wept openly, clutching at strangers as if they had all become one family waiting for something monumental. And then the lights dimmed again. The crowd erupted, but not with the usual hysteria. It was a roar laced with uncertainty, anticipation, reverence. The jumbotrons flickered back to life, and the spotlight cut through the smoke. Michael Jackson stepped back onto the stage. But this time, he wasn't alone. In his arms, cradled gently against his chest, was Jacob. The boy's head rested lightly against Michael's shoulder, his tiny hand clutching the sequins of Michael's jacket. His baseball cap tilted to one side, slipping as the lights hit it, revealing the smooth curve of his pale scalp. The arena gasped. A hush swept over the crowd, pulling the noise down into something softer, sacred. Parents instinctively hugged their children closer. Teenagers pressed their hands to their mouths. Even the toughest-looking men in leather jackets wiped their eyes as they saw the fragile child in the arms of the king of pop. Michael walked slowly to the center of the stage, every step deliberate, every motion careful. He stopped in the spotlight, the boy in his arms illuminated by its golden glow. He lifted the microphone, his voice trembling but clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jacob. He's 7 years old, and tonight he is the bravest person in this entire arena." Applause thundered through the stadium, but it wasn't the usual scream of frenzied fans. It was deep, emotional, respectful. It was 18,000 people clapping for the life of one little boy. Michael knelt gently, setting Jacob down on the piano bench. The boy's legs dangled off the edge, his small hands resting weakly on his lap. Michael sat beside him, his own knees brushing the pedals. He placed the microphone carefully on the piano, leaned close, and whispered something only Jacob could hear. The boy nodded faintly, and for the first time that night, a wide, fragile smile spread across his face. Michael turned back to the microphone. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Jacob told me there's a song he listens to every night, to help him not be afraid. Tonight, he's going to sing it with me." The arena erupted in gasps and cries. Then silence. Michael placed his fingers on the keys. He let them linger, drawing out the anticipation. Then, slowly, gently, he began to play. The opening chords filled the stadium, soft, intimate, tender, the kind of sound you expected in a quiet bedroom, not in a roaring arena. Yet here it was, magnified through the speakers, turning the vast space into something that felt like a living room filled with family. Michael leaned into the microphone, his voice low, trembling. "You are not alone." The crowd erupted in cheers, but quickly hushed again, listening. Michael's voice wasn't polished here. It wasn't the perfect, soaring sound they knew from records. It was raw, cracked with emotion, heavy with tears. And it was beautiful. Then, something extraordinary happened. Jacob opened his mouth. His voice was faint, fragile, nearly lost in the vastness of the stadium. But the microphone caught it, amplifying it just enough. His small, breathy tone blended with Michael's rich, trembling one, creating a duet so heartbreaking and pure that the arena seemed to stop breathing. 18,000 people froze, staring in disbelief. The boy sang. He sang. Margaret clutched Tom's hand in the front row, tears streaming down her cheeks. Tom buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking, then looked up, determined not to miss a second. Michael turned toward Jacob, his face breaking with emotion. He leaned closer, supporting the boy's voice, adjusting his own pitch to match. He wasn't leading. He wasn't carrying. He was lifting. The boy smiled as he sang, his voice trembling, his head bobbing weakly but joyfully. For a moment, the sickness melted away. He wasn't a dying child anymore. He was a performer, singing with his hero, living his dream in front of thousands. Then the miracle multiplied. From the back of the arena, voices began to rise. At first, just a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Soon the entire crowd was singing. 18,000 voices joined Michael and Jacob, their sound swelling into a vast, unified choir. The harmonies weren't perfect. The rhythm wavered, but together it was transcendent. The walls of the arena shook, not from bass or drums, but from human voices bound together in love. The cameras panned across the crowd. Strangers linked arms. Parents lifted their children onto their shoulders so they could see. Teenagers who had come for spectacle were now sobbing, their eyeliner streaking down their cheeks. Even the ushers in the aisles sang softly, their hands pressed over their hearts. On stage, Michael closed his eyes, tears streaming freely down his face as he let his voice tremble into the microphone. Jacob leaned against him, still singing, still smiling. His tiny voice blended with a massive chorus of 18,000 souls. By the final chorus, the sound was overwhelming. Michael lifted his arms wide, surrendering himself to it. He pulled away from the microphone, letting the crowd carry the song. The piano kept playing, but the true music came from the voices filling the air. Jacob tilted his head back, his eyes shining, and sang as loud as his frail lungs would allow. Michael bent down, pressing his forehead to the boy's temple, whispering encouragement even as tears soaked his cheeks. When the song ended, the stadium fell into silence. Not a restless silence, but a reverent one. The kind of silence that only came when everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed something holy. Michael lifted Jacob into his arms again. He stood, turned to face the audience, his eyes red and swollen but glowing with gratitude. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, voice breaking, "you just gave Jacob the night of his life, and I think he just gave us all the reminder of ours." The arena erupted. Applause thundered so loud it rattled the rafters. But it wasn't frenzy. It was reverence. It was love. Jacob rested his head against Michael's shoulder, his tiny smile still glowing. And for that moment, there wasn't a star in his audience. There wasn't a child in his illness. There was only music. Pure, healing, transcendent.